Hello and welcome to Business Standard Dialogue. I'm Nivedita Mookerji, presenting the 15th episode of this webinar series. In this special edition on economic reforms 35 years on, we'll go back to the Union Budget of 1991 and the changes it brought about in the economy and industry. The distinguished panelists will also focus on the reforms that are needed now and in the coming years. To discuss the historic reforms, we have with us Dr. Naushad Forbes, an eminent industrialist. He's joining us from Mumbai. He's co-chairman of Forbes Marshall and was president of CII in 2016-17. We have with us Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, editorial director, Business Standard. And joining us soon will be Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, a principal architect of the 1991 reforms and former deputy chairman of the Planning Commission. He is stuck in traffic and he'll join us soon. He's coming over to the Business Standard office in New Delhi. So we'll start with you, Dr. Forbes. You know, we have been running a series in the newspaper coinciding with 35 years of economic reforms. And we've had businesses share their views about, what the moment meant for them. N.R. Narayan Murthy said trips to the Delhi corridors of power ended. Sunil Bharti Mittal said it was a freedom day for us, the budget day. Tarun Das said it was the fall of Delhi Wall. So to you, what did the 1991 liberalization really mean?
So for us, it was very much of an inflection, and an inflection for the very positive, powerful good. When my brother and I listened to the budget speech together, and I believe the Manmohan Singh budget speech of 1991 is not only a great budget speech, but it's one of the great speeches, I think, of all time, certainly in our history. Soon after the budget speech, we sat down in our organization among our leadership team, and we said, well, the world's going to be coming to India. And if the world's coming to India, how do we change? And so we, the budget, together with, I think maybe a few days before the budget, there was an import policy change that was announced that reduced tariffs very substantially. But mind you, they reduced tariffs to a maximum tariff. If I remember correctly, it was capped at 400%. So it tells you of the kind of time that we were living in at that point. And we said that, look, let's assume that all imports are available at zero tariffs. What will we still make? Where are we competitive? And we asked that question within 2 weeks of the budget speech. And we decided first that there were about half the products that we made where we would not be competitive. And we said, these are products that we should just let them, we don't need to kill them, let them die a natural death over the years as tariffs come down. And for the other half, we said, what do we need to do to become really competitive and competitive internationally in these products? And so we took two calls. The first was to invest substantially in R&D. And the second was to grow international business. Actually, initially, not because we were attracted by international markets, that came later, but because we said, look, if we have to compete with the best in the world in India, the best way to learn how to do that is to go compete with them in their own markets and in third countries. And if we can compete with them effectively in third countries, we can compete with them on home ground perfectly well. So it was, in a sense, to protect our domestic position that we entered international markets. And those two calls of going international and of changing how we defined R&D to one where we needed to develop products that were different to everyone else's, those two calls are still the source of our success. So the two changes that we made, thanks to that budget speech, and thanks to the change in direction we took as a country in 1991, have been absolutely crucial to our success as a business over 35 years.
And do you agree with these views that it was a day of freedom in some sense?
Yes,
for the
totally
industry?
so. Totally so. Thanks to, well, uh, there were these pre-budget meetings with industrialists, and I was invited to participate in them from 1992 onwards, thanks to one of Ashok's erstwhile colleagues, who was also called Ashok Desai, who was then the chief consultant in the finance ministry. And I went to those pre-budget meetings from 1992 to 96. And at the pre-budget meetings, everyone would start by talking about Freedom Day, talking about how this was a completely new direction for the country. But there were also several industrialists who would add that, look, while they welcomed everything, their sector, for some reason, was different and needed some special protection to continue for a period.
You're referring to the Bombay Club?
So the Bombay Club was a more institutionalized process. And by the way, you said I was joining you from Bombay. I disassociate myself completely from Bombay because of the Bombay Club. I'm joining you from Pune, which is a much more outward-looking competitor.
I stand corrected.
So anyway, I think the Bombay Club captured that view. But by the way, the Bombay Club also consisted of many different people. And there were people like Rahul Bajaj, who were very articulate spokesmen for the Bombay Club. But in his own organization, he did everything that needed to be done to make Bajaj Auto a really competitive, successful firm in the long run. So, so there was a difference between people in the Bombay Club who were just trying to hang on to special privileges for as long as they could, and people in the Bombay Club who said, listen, we have limited time, we better get competitive. Let's use the protection we have now as an opportunity to invest in the future.
Okay. We'll come back to Bombay Club in a while. I'm sure AKB will also have questions around that. But AKB, I will come to you as a journalist on the ground. What did 1991 mean to you? Why was it so special for a journalist?
Well, thanks, Nivedita, for having me. It was very, very special, a very unusual moment for an economic journalist. And I will cite four specific, aspects of that unusualness and that special, the moments that we went through as an economic journalist. One that I remember was the pace and frequency of developments and decisions were huge. I don't recall the manner in which the decisions were taken with that pace and with that frequency. And they were not necessarily all very positive. For example, I do still remember when the news broke that India has sent a few tons of its gold to Bank of England for mortgaging. There was big, sensational news, and everybody was saying, "Oh God, what is this country gone to? That you have to mortgaging your gold." That happened in the first week of July, and 3 weeks before the budget. There was also this immediately came the devaluation news. So the media, as an economic journalist, also was actually not. Everybody was saying that nice things. There were some people who were saying, "Oh God, why are you devaluing the currency? Why are you, abolishing cash compensatory support or export subsidies? Because after all, export sector will collapse." So there was a section of the media which was very skeptical of some of the decisions, but there was a large section of the media which was very excited and welcoming of what was happening then. So that was one was the pace and the frequency of those decisions and developments. And number two was as an economic journalist, I realized that the channels of communication during those days, during those weeks, particularly in the month of July, 35 years ago, were varied, were many. I mean, at one level, the government, although it was a minority government, it has just been formed. It was still trying to find its own feet politically as well as through its economic policy making at a time of crisis. I recall how the government, the bureaucrats, the civil servants, and even the ministers were very, very open and communicating with people. And I'm saying it specifically because I don't see that subsequent governments would understand as well as it did then the importance of communication, particularly at a time of crisis. So I think the communication was huge from the government side. Then there was communication from the political, classes as well. Industry was very open. Industry was coming out with its feedback, comments. So you could go out to those days. It was Confederation of Engineering Industry. You could go, I think, or it was still maybe AIEI. Naushad may correct me. You could go out and meet Tarun Das and others and understand from them what is really happening. So there was some sort of not a camaraderie, but understanding that the nation, the economy is in a crisis, when the verge of a kind of a default. So therefore, things have to be done. That was the industry. Then, interestingly, even the foreign, the government's embassies in India, in Delhi, were so much more involved in what was happening in this country. As a chief of economic bureau in the Economic Times those days, I would have guests from many of the foreign governments, commercial councillors in my room. They would come and meet me, trying to communicate what they think is happening or could happen, and also probably sussing out from me what is actually happening.
Those
So
were
there was
different times.
communication was amazing. The third element was the political environment was very, very tense and volatile. Please remember that the industrial policy statement that was made, tabled in Parliament a few hours before the budget was actually presented at 5 o'clock. This was presented by the Minister of State for Industry, Mr. P.J. Kurian. He was not a great votary of reforms. And it was Mr. Narasimha Rao, who, as the Cabinet Minister for Industry, had pushed hard and got it done. So Mr. Kurian was very reluctantly tabled that paper. But there were many other ministers, and I have no hesitation in naming them. People like M.L. Fotedar, who was the health minister at that time. There was Balram Jakar, who was the agriculture minister. They were openly talking about that this is not the way we can take this country back to the Nehruvian glory years. So that was the political environment. And finally, what I would say is this: that the media environment was marked with complete freedom, where media was able to write about things which were right or wrong, whichever it felt. I mean, if a media outlet wrote that India is close to defaulting on its foreign obligations, it would be carried in the newspaper, little worrying that, oh God, you are doing something anti-national. And the finance minister of the country will respond to that news report in Parliament saying that, no, 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 what is happening is this. So I think the environment of 1991, from an economic journalist point of view, was completely different from what has been the situation in the last many years. I think I have given my...
I'm very curious to know about the competition in media at that time. What was the competition like, breaking news around what was happening, the reform, the liberalization?
I think competition was intense, and it was. I think you have to also realize that the importance of business and economy news in general newspapers at that time was not that very large. Only a few newspapers, the general newspapers, would even have a full-fledged business page. I mean, Times of India would have it. Maybe a few others would have it. But most general newspapers would not give the kind of importance to business and economic news, the kind of prominence that you see today. But 1991 was a moment, and that month actually changed everything, where general newspapers started competing with the business papers, the so-called pink papers, with business news and economic news. So, from a very narrow point of view of being an economic journalist, I suddenly saw the competition for news has suddenly got more intense, and one had to survive in that competition, which probably was the true spirit of the economic reforms that was unleashed.
Right. So before Montek Singh Ahluwalia joins us, I'll go over to you, Naushad. The Prime Minister has said reform is not just a fashionable term. It should be a continuous process. Do you agree with that?
It does need to be a continuous process. And I think that's what we saw in the 1991, I wouldn't say to 96 period, but the 1991 to 93 period. In the first 2 years of that minority government, as Ashok pointed out, we saw a series of reforms on the trade side, reforms on industrial licensing, reforms where, for example, MRTP was scrapped. And the entire, if I remember correctly, the entire staff was transferred to the railways. I'm not sure what they did in the railways, but they were transferred to the railways. FERA was scrapped at the time.
DGTD was abolished.
DGTD was abolished, also transferred to the railways. There were a series of moves like that really transformed the environment in which one needed to do business in the country. I mean, the point that Mr. Murthy made, that you no longer needed to go to Delhi.
Delhi corridors, yes.
It sounds like a simple thing, but it was quite a big change. And the papers wrote about it at the time. As Ashok said, the papers wrote about it at the time. By the way, exactly as you were saying, Ashok, the debate was also carried in the papers. The disagreements with the policies were carried in the papers. Disagreements from within the party in parliament. I think Manmohan Singh spent half his time, maybe 1/3 of his time, explaining things to the opposition, and 2/3 of his time explaining things to his own party members in terms of what he was doing and why he was doing it. We say that those reforms were easy. They were not easy. I mean, I remember coverage in the papers again of a time when Manmohan Singh went to Calcutta and gave a speech, and people feared for his safety. So he and his team had to be taken out by the back door because they were afraid that there could be violence if they went out from the front door.
Oh, really?
I mean, there was a lot of agitation and a lot of opposition to what was happening in 1991. So anyone who tells you that, oh, those reforms were easy because of the crisis, etc., it's not true. The reforms were difficult. They took a lot of persuasion. They took a lot of arguing in favor, and especially arguing in favor with people from the Congress party itself, from the backbenchers in the Congress party, and some, as Ashok said, some front benchers, some people who were ministers who needed a lot of persuasion that this was the right direction to go in. Things changed dramatically in the next year or two, and we moved to a situation where everyone broadly was aligned with the direction that we had taken, because people started seeing the results.
Well, welcome to the show, Mr. Ahluwalia.
Thank you for having me.
So I have already done the introduction. Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, one of the main architects of the 1991 reforms and former Deputy Chairman, Planning Commission. Welcome to the show again, and thanks for coming over to our office. I hope the traffic wasn't too bad.
Well, it was pretty bad actually, but that I guess you can attribute that to prosperity.
All right.
You can attribute that to the prosperity your reforms unleashed, Montek.
Absence of reforms.
Yeah, you're right.
So I'll come to you. I'll call you Montek. That's easy. Montek, so your thoughts about the 1991 reforms, what is it that you remember the most?
My God, that's very tough. I mean, I've written a whole book on it. So I
Any
think if
conversation
you
that you
ask
have?
me what I remember, I mean, this is just a personal view. It was my view for several years that our whole approach to economic planning was wrong. I think I remember Ashok pointed out some people saying this is not the way to create Nehruvian socialism. I mean, the reforms were a recognition that while Nehruvian socialism might have made sense in the very first 10 years or so of independent India, that kind of economic approach was fundamentally wrong for India. I mean, this looks harsh, but unless you accept this fact, you won't understand the reforms. And I think we were missing out on a tremendous growth possibility, which was open if we didn't decide to suppress the private sector. I mean, remember, Nehruvian socialism, as understood then, basically said number one, the state must occupy the commanding heights of the economy. Wrong, in my view. I mean, the state should have a commanding position so it can direct the future, but it doesn't have to have the commanding position in the economy. It's absolutely wrong, in my view, to reserve a whole lot of industries for the private sector because the industries were thought to be important. I mean, remember, JRD, I mean, Tata himself, the old Mr. Tata, had set up a steel plant long before any of this. And the British who ran the country had said, this is ridiculous. I don't think Indians can set up steel plants. And if you produce steel, I'll eat every kg of steel you produce. And the Tatars set up a steel plant, and the damn thing actually was used to provide the steel for Sydney Harbour. And we came to the conclusion that steel is very important. And although the Tatars have demonstrated for the last 30 years that they can produce it, we said, no, it must be reserved for the public sector. Now, how much more stupid can you get? So, I mean, there were several things we were doing which didn't make any sense. So I was delighted. I mean, I wanted to come back and work in government primarily because I felt that a sort of a multifaceted reorientation of policy was necessary. Frankly, I never thought that we would be able to see the kind of changes that the duo of Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh were able to bring. Well, I think Chidambaram deserves a lot of credit for this because I was then the Commerce Secretary in the beginning, sort of persuading Chidambaram to pick up the kind of reforms that we were working on, and he did it, understood it straight away and joined the team, so to speak. Okay, and we were just supporting him. And I think that that period of really a few days saw more change in India than any other period has done over a much longer period. That's my dominant recollection, it's my personal recollection. People may disagree with me, and that's a different thing. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And I should also mention something that I think Ashok touched upon, or was it maybe Naushad? I think it was Naushad who said that people think because there was a crisis, it was easy. That is, again, completely wrong. Because there was a crisis, it was necessary to manage the crisis. But the crisis could have been managed in an unimaginative way, or it could have been used as an opportunity to move in a new direction. That second thing is what made 91 important. Crisis would have got managed. When you say a crisis, I mean, we could have gone back to a 4% growth rate and not had a default. That's not what I call That's not why 91
Yeah.
is important.
Exactly.
Any conversation that you remember that you had with then Finance Minister Manmohan Singh or with Narasimha Rao, Prime Minister at that time, around reforms that you
Yeah,
recollect?
sure. I mean, look, I'll tell you, in 91, I was Commerce Secretary. We had been working, even in the previous government, we'd been at the bureaucratic level, we'd been working on a pretty major deregulation system, getting rid of all. I mean, the worst thing about the system was something ridiculously called the Directorate General of Trade and Development, or
Technical development.
Technical Development, DGTD, whose main role actually was to ensure that no technical development took place.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's comic, but I used to attend these meetings from the Ministry of Finance, where in those days, if you wanted to import something, I mean, you had to actually get a license for almost everything. And that license was cleared in a committee chaired by the Chief Controller of Imports and Exports. Okay, very good man in this particular case. And he would hear the view of different ministries. And it was a completely silo-like approach. I mean, the finance ministry view was we must conserve foreign exchange. So if anyone else says that this import is not necessary, that's a good idea and we should support them. The DGTD, I mean, God bless it. You should, Ashok, you should do a separate article. Nobody will understand how stupid it was until you fully describe it.
Yeah.
Now, the DGTD used to do two very important things. It used to give the application for import would be given clearances on two counts. One is essentiality, and the other is indigenous angle. Now, what that meant was that if someone like Naushad, running a business, felt that in order to produce something better, he needed to get something which was imported, some bureaucrat who had probably never worked in any business ever would be able to tell him that I don't really think you need this. So it's just not essential.
Yes.
And assuming you got over that, you would have to argue with another bureaucrat who would decide whether it is produced indigenously and therefore you don't need to import it. I mean, this means that if you have some kind of a metering instrument which had a very high order of, if you like, accuracy, and somebody else said, well, I can do something which is almost as good, the bureaucrat could say, yeah, I mean, I think you better tell Naushad to use this rather than the other. And at every stage, a businessman would have an excuse for why he's not doing well. And the excuse would be, I asked for this machine and you didn't give it to me. So naturally, I'm producing stuff which is lousy. This is best exemplified by what happened in the case of Maruti. Now, Maruti was a wonderful, it was a break in an important sense because it was done in order to create an indigenous car. And the very first thing that Krishnamurti managed to persuade Mrs. Gandhi was that, look, it can't be done through indigenous technology. We have to import technology. And then he also brought in a little bit of foreign investment in the form of Suzuki. And the government said, look, you have to indigenize. So you can import the engine block for the first 2 or 3 years. After that, you have to produce the engine block at home. So they agreed to do that. So naturally, what they said, the Japanese management and Bhargava and others who were the Indian side of it, they said, yeah, we can now produce the engine block. And in order to produce the engine block, we need machine tools. That's when the DGTD came in, because these guys wanted Japanese machine tools. And the DGTD said, no, Hindustan Machine Tools can do it. Hindustan Machine Tools was a public sector company. And they said, yes, we can do it. And the proof that they could do it was that they're doing it for the engine block of the Bajaj scooter. So Bhargav had to explain that, look here, the Bajaj scooter engine block is a certain size. This one is much larger. And I don't think because they could do the one, they can do the other. And also the tolerance levels for a scooter are totally different from the tolerance level for a modern car. Now, this issue was demonstrated by Bhargav, and you can ask him. The meeting took place in the room of N.D. Tiwari, who was then industry minister, and Bhargav brought an engine block of the Maruti, put it on the table, and brought the much, much smaller engine block of the two-wheeler and put it on the table. And the minister looked at it and said, no, I think we better allow them to import the machine tool. You know, this is the going backward thing. Remember, Maruti was indigenizing. They said we will produce the engine block and we are ready to do it. But in order to produce the engine block, I need high quality machine tools. And somebody said, no, you can produce this with the machine tools that HMT produces. I mean, this has been deeply hardwired into the bureaucracy, I fear. And sometimes I fear that, the quality control orders and all this debate that's going on, it's exactly the same kind of thing.
Right. Montek,
Bureaucratic intervention to make it impossible for a businessman to do what he wants to do as a businessman.
Before you joined, Naushad was talking about the budget speech of 1991, and he said not just budget speech, it is one of the best speeches of all times. So did you have any idea what Manmohan Singh was going to say in that speech, and quoting Victor Hugo, etc.? Did you have an inkling?
No, I didn't. And by the way, when he made the budget speech, I was then Commerce Secretary.
Yeah, you were Commerce
So
Secretary.
I wasn't in the Finance Ministry. Of course, my colleagues who were in the Finance Ministry, that budget speech, I'm glad that Naushad has drawn attention to it. It's a beautiful speech.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about the speech is not for the speech announced, because everything important had already been announced. The devaluation had been announced. The industrial policy changes had been announced. The abolition of import controls had been announced. What he did was the speech was to explain all these things.
Yeah.
And it is a phenomenally good explanation of why we need to make changes. It's a wonderful essay in persuasion.
Yeah.
These quotes, etc., I don't even think the bureaucrats knew, because he would add them in at the very end. I mean, I know in the speeches that I was in, but the very next one, a lot of this stuff, particularly the Shairi and all that was his own personal contribution.
Okay.
Even the Montek, even the one on that the stage, the Lincoln one, that was also
absolutely
done?
I mean, I was there. I was then the Secretary of Economic Affairs.
Yeah.
And that was his idea. And it's quite interesting because, he ended up, it was a long speech, because unlike the first one, this had a lot of actual proposals, which he was outlining for the first time. And he was pretty tired at the end of it. And he said, Mr. Speaker, sir, I've now come to the end of my labors and I'd like to go to the theater.
Yeah.
That was a reference to what happened, because, the BJP was saying to him, you've leaked the budget, this, that, we're going to have a lot of problems. So he said, I'm going to the theater. I'd like to go to the theater. That was a reference to Lincoln being assassinated in the Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. I think he said something about let the assassins do their worst.
Yes, he did say that. Yeah.
But then he added in Urdu, सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे मन में है, देखना है जोर कितना बाजुए कातिल में है. Again, a pure Manmohan Singh addition. And the interesting thing is that Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was leader of the opposition at the time, he came across and said to him, "Are aap hame qatil bol rahe hain?" There was a lot of friendly kind of exchange. Atalji had constantly told Manmohan Singh that, look, these are all sensible things, but you do it, but I'm not sure we can always support you. And at one time, he went to Vajpayee and said, look, you said you would support, and, now some of your fellows are criticizing me. And Atal Bihari said to him, Mr. Singh, if you're in politics, you must learn to have a thick skin. That's a very wise comment, So that was
Right.
a bit of the scene, if you like.
We can go on discussing these interesting speeches, but we'll change the order of things a bit. AKB, maybe you wanted to ask some question during those days and you could not. So you have Montek here. You can shoot your question.
Oh, I didn't expect that. But Montek, my one question would be, looking back, do you think there was, things could have been done in a slightly better way by sequencing the reforms a little more, in a sense that a lot of people say that the product markets were liberalized, capital's side was liberalized, the financial sector, the sectors were liberalized, but the basic thing on agriculture, the civic administration, the judicial, power distribution, those reforms were not, not even talked about till at least in the 10 or 15 years later. So, in terms of sequencing of reforms, do you think it could have been changed? I mean, or could the reforms have handled them at the same time, or it was too much?
No, obviously one should always be open to the sequencing question. But I want to make one or two comments. First, the people who say that the 91 reforms did nothing for agriculture are not taking an all economy view. The most important thing for agriculture was industrial protection went down and the exchange rate was depreciated. That is a huge benefit to agriculture. Because in the earlier regime, the import value of agricultural goods was understated because you were running an exchange rate that was overstated, right? So, I mean, that is a huge change, and it was a wonderful price change. It would be reflected in all kinds of relative price signals, which later on showed up in the growth of all the sort of horticulture and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, when we talk about agricultural reforms, I mean, the Chinese, they had completely squished their agriculture. So they did the reform first. But we hadn't squished agriculture. I mean, people were free to produce whatever they wanted. Okay. So I don't think that the agriculture thing, there are things we need to do in agriculture, even today, but they are the second generation issues. And we're not doing very much on that. And I think that's a big problem. But we did, I think, where perhaps I would say that we should have done more, but it's education. You know, I think that has been neglected in our system. But my point is, we could, it would take 10 years. If we get education right, it would take 10 years for results to show. So the idea that in 91 we say, look here, we've got a whole lot of things to do, but because we haven't got education right, we're going to delay all that, that would have been wrong. So I think it is true we would have done better had we fixed the educational system earlier, but I don't think we should have not done the reforms when we did.
Sure.
Many of the other areas you talk about, civic, etc., they run into our constitutional problem that the center cannot do very much about them. And I think people have neglected, there was nothing that the center could have done on a lot of reforms that actually lie in the realm of the states. I mean, technically, agriculture is a state subject.
State subject.
If there was a state in India that wanted to modernize its agriculture, there was nothing stopping it from doing so.
There was this criticism, I remember, in 1991 when we were covering the reforms, that the government has liberalized entry, but they have not liberalized exit. How do you see that? Exit in terms of labor as well as industries.
No, that's a fair point in the sense that a lot of people felt that you couldn't close down a business without permission of the central government. But mind you, a lot of them would just let it die. It's not as if, but it did mean that they were not able to extract from the business all the benefits that they could have extracted. So I agree that what you might call it, the banking sector reforms, which later on became more important, where people who were not paying back their debts could be taken to a debtor's court, and the thing could either be sort of written off or paid back in full, or the assets sold in order to realize it. Those things would have been nice to do earlier. But we had a lot of basic stuff to do. I mean, remember, in the past, Indian industry used to get all its money from the so-called industrial lending institutions. Dhirubhai Ambani, in fact, made the capital market a credible source of getting money, first through debentures and then through capital issues, so he could finance industry. Now, our whole idea was to liberalize industry. And if you're going to liberalize industry, you must let them fund themselves, and the funding had to be done competitively. And some guys were just very effective in raising funds, and others were not. So I mean, look, it would be a good idea to review it in retrospect and see what could have been done faster and better. No doubt.
Well, there was actually a very badly named exit policy, because Manmohan Singh, in one of his, if not the 1991 budget speech, I think in the 92 budget speech, announced a labor reform, and
you're right.
And then
you're right.
Which was then called an exit policy. There was a lot
Yes.
of opposition from within the Congress party, and he had to withdraw that.
While he was in Tokyo,
backtrack
while he was in Tokyo, he made an announcement there because there was a groundswell of protest by the labor unions. Yeah.
AKB, it's your chance to ask a tough question to Naushad.
you are creating enmities between the two of us. Anyway, so Naushad, my question to you would be that as an industry leader, would you have liked those reforms to have been handled or managed or conceived, visualized in a different way? I mean, if you had in the government or in the finance ministry?
I thought the reforms of 1991 to 93 were terrific, and they, if anything, exceeded my expectations. They were a change in direction for us as a country that was overwhelming. I was disappointed in the lack of subsequent reform between 1993 and 1996. So I felt that the government kind of ran out of steam, and I think it was because at that point in time, I think Narasimha Rao was thinking about the election in 19...
And security scam came in 1993.
There were things like that also. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And there was so I would have liked to have seen it keep going in a way, and it wasn't for lack of ideas. I think the government had ideas. Montek, Manmohan had ideas of what they wanted to do, but they did not feel that they could make those things happen in that political environment of 93 to 96.
Yeah. Taking it forward, how do you think the Bombay Club, dissipate itself? Did it dissipate itself? Or do you think Bombay Club is still alive?
So the Bombay Club, many members of the Bombay Club. So as I spoke about Rahul Bajaj, where he was an articulate spokesman for the Bombay Club, but he did all the right things for his own firm, right? So Bajaj Auto has thrived in subsequent years. Many of the other members of the Bombay Club essentially disappeared as industrialists,
right?
So in a sense, they just counted for much less. Because many of the old business groups that dealt in commodities essentially vanished over the next, not right away, but over the next 10, 15 years. In fact, one of the concerns we should have probably is that there was a lot of churn of firms and the leading firms in the period from, say, 1991 to about 2000. It seems to me that the churn slowed after. And and it slowed subsequently again. And I think that churn in firms is very healthy because it means that a more competitive firm succeeds, grows, becomes a larger part of the economy. New sectors like pharmaceuticals and IT in the 90s come to prominence. If you look back over the last 20 years, I think we've seen much less of that churn taking place in our leading firms.
Let's come to 2026 now. And Montek, I'll come to you. You mentioned education reform, and that didn't quite happen. But we've just seen a very intense student agitation in Jantar Mantar and elsewhere in the country. And the government has taken certain steps. Do you think what government has done right now, two things? One, bill has been passed in the Lok Sabha, and second, a committee has been set up with Nandan Nilekani heading it. Do you think these are enough steps, or what should be done?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me say any bringing of Nandan Nilekani into the government is a very good idea. I mean, after all, we saw him coming in UPA 2 to take over the Aadhaar, and that has been a fantastic success during UPA and continued by the current government. And it's a clear case of a altogether new thing happening. So it's terrific that Nandan is involved. Now, mind you, what Nandan is, I don't know enough about this, but what the committee has been asked to do is to find a technological way of running exams where the papers don't leak. I don't think they've been asked to get into the issue of reform of the education system or even what the papers should be. So it's a more limited mandate. But, mind you, if they broaden the mandate and get him involved in this, that'd be terrific. I think we have a deeper problem here. And the deeper problem is that, we're not generating as much employment as we should. And I think what's happened is that, while we have a growth rate which looks like 6.5%, at least for the last few years, the employment position does not seem to feel like 6.5%. And this has led many economists, now I've not done research on this, but many economists therefore say that what's happened is we're moving towards a kind of you can call it a K-shaped economic growth path, where the more capital-intensive part of the economy is doing very well, expanding, that's high-tech, etc., etc. But the middle and lower capital-intensive part isn't doing well, okay? And a lot of, that's where the employment is going to come from. Now, the problem for young people, I don't know how you read the protests because you always have to go behind the scenes. The students who were protesting were not all people who had been taking NEET exams. You could tell that from the age and also both in terms of youth and a little bit above the minimum age. They were young people. And I have a feeling that underneath this is a sense of despair, that while they like the image of Viksit Bharat and ambitious targets, they don't feel on the ground that the economy is doing enough to make them feel that good times are around the corner. And hopefully the government is thinking about it and will respond in some way. Now, what do you do? That is a whole range of things which is reforms in a wide range of the economy to create the jobs. Underneath that is also the fact, and I've talked to business people who tell me that, look, when they need skilled labor, they don't have it. So we have an image that there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people with a BA degree, but those are not tradable degrees in the sense that they're really fitting people for jobs in government and taking exams to do essentially clerical work. We're not producing enough skilled people for whom there's a demand. So how do you do that? Now, look, I think it amounts to saying that we need to look at a reform of our entire educational system. And that's not what Nandan Nilekani has been asked to do. I think it'd be wonderful if we asked him and set up a committee suitable for that to do it. The new education policy, I mean, at a macro level, said all the right things. But you're going to translate that into how are you going to get the institutions? And, the fact of the matter is that most state governments are not spending enough money on education. A lot of it is being taken up with freebies. And so actually, when these announcements of freebies are made, they're very popular. I mean, that's why they do them. The consequence of that is that you don't have the money to provide your universities adequately or even provide schools adequately. And in many states, for example, there are state government problems. Retired professors are not getting their pensions on time because it's very easy for a government to squeeze out what otherwise would be called essential expenditure in order to fund new things.
If there was to be a document like M document in 2026, what would it look like? Can you tell us in brief summary?
No, I mean, look, I should say this, that writing the M document was actually not very difficult. Because unless you were fixed in your mind that, the 1956 Industrial Policy Resolution was the greatest signal for development, all you had to do was look around. What's happening in the world? And the first thing that would strike you is that India is doing things that others are not doing, and they are doing better than India. So why the hell are we doing this? By the way, that problem still exists. I mean, I would think in many areas, take ease of doing business, for example. If you use the simple test, are other people doing this? And if they're not, why are we? You'll find a lot of things which you could put into the new M1 document or M2 document. Somebody I know told me, and I'm just repeating, they did a little analysis of what have been the changes, the number of changes in regulations on the financial sector. That's SEBI and RBI and a few other, just the financial side. From January 1 to June, something like 4 or 5 months, there have been 12,000 changes in the regulations. Now, just ask me, just look around, choose 6 well-performing emerging economies. Are they making 12,000 changes? I'm sure they're not. So why on earth are we doing this? Every time we do this, somebody can become guilty of non-compliance. So, I mean, I think I support the view that we need to do more on ease of doing business. A very good report was submitted by Rajiv Gauba, for example, on QCOs. I've not seen the report because it's not been made public. But I was told, and a lot of people say that it said, that, there is no rationale whatsoever for having QCOs on intermediates. Now, I think we should take a view on that. Either he's right or wrong. I think he's right. If you agree with that, just abolish another 500 QCOs which are on intermediates. That would be a humongous reform. And it would be stroke of the pen. But,
Right.
Other reforms like improving the quality of regulators, that is a very much more complex thing. It's not a stroke of the pen reform. It's a question of how do you run these systems? How do you staff these systems? And bring in more professionalism. I'll give you one simple thing we could do. We tend to staff regulators by appointing civil servants to them. Okay? Since if you're a civil servant and you become appointed to a regulator's position, you get another 5 years of service. Otherwise, you retire at 60. This way, you retire at 65. My suggestion would be make sure that you stream the civil service so that, let's say, anybody who becomes, say, additional secretary will retire at 65. If any of them want to apply for a regulator's position before retiring, they can do so. But becoming a regulator doesn't extend your position. My guess is the vast majority of them would prefer to be in government and not go off and become regulator. That way, you could bring in professionals who might be interested in the job.
That's a great suggestion. Naushad, coming to the 2026 question for you, what needs to be done to unleash the animal spirits in India Inc.?
So I think it does need unleashing again. And I think there's more specific things, and I think there's a general point. The more specific things have to do with import tariffs. I think we've seen import tariffs rise. We have ended up with actually inverted duty structures where intermediates are at higher rates of duty than finished goods. Every economist would tell you that the right way of thinking about tariffs is if you have them, it should be the other way around. And it's something that is easily fixed. It's the kind of thing that can be done indeed at the stroke of a pen, as Montek said. And I think that should be used as a way of forcing firms to compete. What firms need to do also is and this is a choice of firms more than anything else, it's not a choice of policy, is they need to invest much more in R&D. It's an old point. It's a point that several of us have been going on about for many years. We grossly underinvest in R&D. I think that should be combined with the reduction in protection, because in a way, especially if you do it in a phased way, and if firms are clear that in a 5-year period tariffs will be zero for their products, then they have time to adjust and time to invest in technology, so that they have to compete in that 5-year period. And I think forcing that on firms is something that would be very powerful as a way of unleashing what Indian industry needs to do to invest in R&D. I'll say one. That's the specific thing. The more general thing is that I think one of the things that the reforms of 1991 did was to unleash animal spirits in general. It unleashed the animal spirits of industrialists and entrepreneurs around the country. I think we talk too much now about sort of national champions, and I think that's a mistake. I think the Indian economy is private sector driven. It's an economy where enterprise should be expected in all states, in all sectors, to come from individual entrepreneurs. And that can happen only if you have an economy where entrepreneurs in general are encouraged to invest and are encouraged to invest freely in the knowledge that we will go by a certain set of rules that we can believe in and follow. We moved in that direction in the period after 1991. There's still lots of work to be done, I think, in taking that to its logical conclusion. There is this in sort of industrial policy has made a return in the world, not only in India but also including India. And unfortunately, if industrial policy takes the form of particular incentives available to all firms to move in a particular direction, that's one thing. If it's available as incentives for particular firms to move in a particular direction, then I really worry, because that's not consistent with the direction that I think will make us a really thriving economy.
Right. AKB, what are your thoughts on way forward on reforms? What should be done?
Well, I think both Montek and Naushad have listed out many such things, and I will try to, whatever I will say most probably would be summing them up. And what I would say is that I see broad 5 areas of reforms that need to be looked at. Number one, in my view, would be look at agriculture, where 43% of your workforce is still employed. So therefore, you need to reform agriculture in a way that your productivity goes up and this over dependence on agriculture comes down from a workforce point of view. Then there is the second area would be skilling. I think we are way down the ladder in terms of the skilling space. Number three would be healthcare and water. We are underestimating the problems that might arise on account of the water situation, including environment and healthcare. And the fourth would be, which Naushad just now mentioned, about the kind of reversal that we have seen on trade policy reform and industrial policy reform. We need to change the course and correct that course and bring about more trade policy reform and industrial policy reform. National champions is no way out. PLIs are no way out. Tariffs need to come down. And finally, I would say we need governance reform, which is, and it is not just the governance of the way the government functions, also the system that runs the government, the civil services, civil servants. This government began its third term with a bold idea of lateral entries, but just brushed it under the carpet because there were some protests, most probably from the civil servants themselves. So what Montek suggested that give them 65 years and maybe they will not apply. Bring this, open up the civil services to lateral entrants and let there be more competition for talent.
Thanks, AKB, for summing it up so well, but we'll have to take a few audience questions. There are many, and we have already discussed for an hour, but we'll take a few questions. The first question is from Surjit Bhalla, noted economist. His question is, governments have come and governments have gone, but constant as the Northern Star, the share of manufacturing refuses to budge. Why? Who wants to take that question?
Would you like me to have a shot?
Yeah, sure.
So when this is actually a question that Rakesh Mohan has asked several times, that the reforms post 1991 were aimed at industry, and why do you not see industry share in GDP rising as you would expect? First of all, we should remember that the economy has been growing more rapidly than we've in previous decades. So industry share has stayed about the same. So that's not terrible, but it's not great either, right? The only answer that I can provide is that if you look at India's industrial structure, we have a more skill and capital intensive industrial structure than other countries at our level of development, at our level of per capita GDP. And if we have the skill and capital intensive industrial structure that we have, then we better invest in R&D. Because if we do not invest much more in technical capability, a capital and skill-intensive industrial structure will not thrive. So to me, that's where the answer lies. It lies in investments in R&D. We also need to address labor-intensive industry, and labor-intensive industry can grow perfectly well for long periods of time without investments in R&D, but that's not where we've specialized. We've specialized in capital and skill-intensive. And for skill and capital-intensive industry to thrive, R&D needs to be a much larger part of what we worry about on a day-to-day basis in our firms.
Ankur Bhardwaj from Business Standard, he has a question. If the reforms of 1991 had not happened, what would India look like in 2026?
Pakistan.
No, that's a good answer, by the way. I mean,
Okay,
let me put it
right.
this way. If they hadn't happened in 91, I think we have enough bounce in us that they would have happened a little later. But that was a wonderful use of a crisis to get them done. And I mean, I agree with what has been said. There's lots more that needs to be done. I don't think we can lay out a comprehensive list, but it would be nice if one could get an agreement on some specific things. I mean, Naushad has very rightly, I think, drawn attention to the what you might call the customs duty, inverted duty structure. This has been talked about by industry, academics. I think in 2025 budget, even the finance minister had recognized that there are problems, and she has said we're going to set up a group to look into it. Now, I don't know what's happened. If it has not happened, it wouldn't take long. I mean, I think CII, to my knowledge, had made a very general recommendation
Yeah.
that, sort of raw materials, 2%, intermediates, whatever, 5%, and final goods, 7%.
Yeah.
Now, to my mind, all that you need is a declaration that we are going to restructure the existing duties so that we will narrow them to this range over the next 3 years, and the next budget will be the first indication what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That is enough.
Exactly.
Now, if you don't want to do that, then that's a different matter. You have to remember, by the way, that I'm glad that we've signed these FTAs. I think Commerce Minister deserves to be congratulated for the UK, or before that, Australia, EU. I don't know
New
what's
Zealand.
happening on the US, but everyone keeps telling me it's about to happen. Let's hope it does. I personally think we should apply to join the CPTPP. I mean, that doesn't include China, and it covers Asia, and that's where the growth is going to be. So is there any reason for not joining the CPTPP if we've joined the Europeans? I don't know why. I mean, maybe this is being considered, but you want a specific suggestion? That's a specific suggestion.
Mr. Gopal Agarwal, there's this question he said particularly for Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. What do you think of the current state of the development model vis-a-vis what was accomplished 35 years ago? And what is your assessment for the next 35 years?
My goodness, how many minutes are you giving me to answer the next 35? No, I think Gopal's raised a very important point. I don't think that what we meaning direction by UPA, and in some areas, the present government has also moved in that direction. The problem really is, as Naushad said, that after that euphoric pace that was there up to 1993, it kind of died. For the next 35 years, they're going to be very different from what the last 35 were. And I think we should understand that. Number one, the earlier, remember 1991 is when, just after Fukuyama had written his, the end of history and the last man and so on. There was a perception that liberal democracy had won, globalization was the only game in town, etc., etc. That over time eroded. And so the first thing is that the earlier assumption that you're running a global liberal order with the US as a kind of hegemonic guardian, that's no longer true. Even the US doesn't say it wants to do that. So it's going to be a different kind of world where trade policy will have to be carefully navigated along the lines that Naushad has already pointed out. I think we must be very clear that what has happened does not mean that we'll reverse our views on trade policy, but we have to be more intelligent about it. And we can't assume that things are going to move in a certain direction. That's point number one. Point number two, the geopolitics has changed dramatically, and we will have to spend more on defense. And quite frankly, unless we build that into our budgeting loud and clear, we will be overcommitting in other areas where we don't have the resources, or we won't deliver on defense, and neither of those is acceptable. Third, climate change. That's a huge problem. And unfortunately, the world has given up on trying to collaborate on it. The US is the largest country in the world and second largest emitter after China, and they've kind of abandoned the idea. So what's going to happen on climate change is a serious problem. And since there's going to be less cooperation, we are going to suffer. And therefore, we will have to spend a lot of money in taking care of that problem. I mean, for example, how do we manage water scarcity, which is going to increase? Many of our existing policies will have to be rewritten in order to cope with that situation. And lastly, technology. Technology is going to change at a pace much faster than it ever did before. And I don't have to outline all this, but you're seeing what's going on with AI. There's no question that certain jobs that were good jobs to have are not going to, they're actually going to decline. At what pace, one can't be sure, but you can see that happening. I mean, new AI jobs are going to come in, but then we need to be ready to cash in on that. And the problem with the AI is that, it's one thing if we cash in on it at its most labor intensive and skill intensive end. It's quite another if we want to dominate the system, even in the hardware, because the money involved in doing that is huge. So I think we need to have a clear understanding what is feasible and what is not. And based on a realistic assessment of what is feasible, could we agree on some very specific things that are going to get done in the next 3 years? That's what we need.
Many questions remain, but we have run completely out of time. Thank you so much for a great discussion. AKB has already summed it up, but I want to mention in the opening piece of the Business Standard series on 35 years of reforms, T.N. Nainan, former editor of the newspaper, said, the promise has only been partially redeemed. And today's discussion also came to the same point, and we have discussed the future course of action. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.